Hey guys, it's Sports Dude 13 here, and today I'm going to be doing another wacky bracket. This one will be, what if the March Madness tournament of 2026 were to be based off of college football? So starting off with this first one, I think Duke would beat Siena in football because, I don't think I've ever heard of Siena having a football program. And Duke's football program has been kind of doing good recently. They won the ACC in football this past season. Then this next one, obviously, Ohio State would beat TCU in football. A few years ago, they won a national title in the sport of football. And then this next one here is a tough one. I'll have to research both of their football programs for St. John's and Northern Iowa real quick, so I'll be right back. So, after researching, I did find out, yes, since last year, of course, the St. John's that we all know, which is in New York, does not have a football program. Although there's another St. John's, which is St. John's University of Minnesota, but that's a different St. John's that currently has a football program. But the St. John's we're talking about is the one in New York. The St. John's in New York used to have a football program, but not anymore. And it last played in 2002. Northern Iowa, on the other hand, does have a football program, and they currently play in the FCS. So with that being said, Northern Iowa moves on because they currently have a football program and St. John's does not. Well, St. John's used to have a football program, but not anymore. So that's why Northern Iowa moves on. Up next, I think Kansas would beat Cal Baptist in football. I never even heard of Cal Baptist having a football program. Then I think Louisville would beat South Florida in football. And then for this one, I'm going to say North Dakota State would beat Michigan State in football because North Dakota State has one of the best FCS football programs ever. So, and I think they would beat Michigan State if they were to match up with them in football. Then we got UCLA and UCF. I think UCF would beat UCLA in football. And then for this one, I think UConn would beat Furman in football. I never even heard of Furman having a football program. UConn does have a football program, but it's sometimes not. But UConn's football program is just not that good, or sometimes it's all right. Moving down to the West region, or South region, I should say. Florida would be either Prairie View or Lehigh if they were to match up with them in football. And then for this one, I think Clemson would beat Iowa in football. Vandy would beat McNeese in football. I did look up whether McNeese did have a football program, I think a few years ago, and they actually did. And then this one, Nebraska would beat Troy in football. And this one, North Carolina would beat VCU in football. Illinois would beat Penn in football. Yep, the Penn Quakers. Texas A&M would beat St. Mary's in football. Well, St. Mary's, I think, used to have a football program, but not anymore when I looked them up, I think a few years back. And then for this one, of course, Houston would beat Idaho in football. Moving up to the West, Arizona would beat Long Island in football. Never heard of Long Island having a football program. This one, I think Utah State would beat Villanova in football. Well, Villanova's football program plays in the FCS. And Utah State's football program plays in the Mountain West, just like in football. And then Wisconsin would beat High Point in football. Never heard of High Point having a football program. And then Arkansas, Hawaii. I think Arkansas would beat Hawaii if they were to match up with them in football. And then I think Texas would beat BYU if they were to match up with them in football. And then for this one, another tough one. I know Gonzaga used to have a football program, but I'm not sure about Kennesaw State. I'm going to have to research whether if Kennesaw State has a football program or not, so I'll be right back. After researching whether if Kennesaw State has a football program or not, Kennesaw State actually does have a football program, and they currently play in the FBS, which is the highest level of college football. And their football program currently plays in Conference USA, just like their basketball program does. So with that, Kennesaw State moves on because Kennesaw State has a football program and Gonzaga does not. Well, Gonzaga used to have a football program, but not anymore. Moving on down, Miami would beat Missouri if they were to match up with them in football. Well, Miami is historically the better football program than Missouri. And then Purdue would beat Queens in football. I never even heard of Queens University having a football program. And then moving down to the Midwest region, Michigan would beat either UMBC or Howard in football. Never even heard of either UMBC or Howard having a football program. And then this one is pretty easy. Georgia would beat St. Louis if they were to match up with them in football. And then over here, Texas Tech would beat Akron if they were to match up with them in football. And then Bama would obviously destroy Hofstra in football. They would 100% destroy them in football. And then Tennessee would beat either Miami of Ohio or SMU. And yes, the Miami that I chose to move on there was the Miami Hurricanes against Missouri, just to clarify that, so that way we don't get confused on the two Miamis there. But anyways, Tennessee would be either Miami of Ohio or SMU if they were to match up with them in football. Then Virginia would beat Wright State in football. And then for this one, Kentucky would beat Santa Clara in football. I never even really heard of Santa Clara having a football program of its own. And then this one, Iowa State would beat Tennessee State if they were to match up with them in football. I don't know if I've even heard of Tennessee State having a football program of their own. Into the second round we go. Ohio State would beat Duke in football. Kansas would beat Northern Iowa in football. I think Louisville would beat North Dakota State in football. And then for this one, UCF would beat UConn in football. For this one here, I think Clemson gets the edge against Florida in football. Both of them are really good football programs, but I think Clemson currently is better in football right now than Florida is. And then over here, I think Vandy would beat Nebraska in football. And then I think North Carolina would beat Illinois in football. They were a matchup with them. And then for this one, I think Texas A&M would beat Houston if they were to match up with them in football. And then for right here, I don't know who would win in a game of football between either Arizona or Utah State. I'm going to give the slight edge to Utah State. I think they've been better in football recently than Arizona's had. So, yep. And then for this one, I think Wisconsin would beat Arkansas in football. And then Texas would beat Kennesaw State in football. And then for over here, Miami would obviously beat Purdue in football. Miami Hurricanes. That's what we're talking about there. And then in this one, both Michigan and Georgia have really good football programs. But I think Georgia gets the edge over Michigan in football. And then Alabama would beat Texas Tech in football. And then Tennessee would beat Virginia in football. And then I think Iowa State would beat Kentucky in football. Then we go on to our Sweet 16. Ohio State would win against Kansas in football. And then over here, I think Louisville would beat UCF in football. And then this one would obviously be Clemson beating Vandy. And I think Texas A&M gets the edge over North Carolina if they were to match up with them in football. And then I think Wisconsin would beat Utah State in football. And then Miami would beat Texas in football. And then between Georgia and Alabama, both of them have really good football programs out of the SEC. And both of them would usually compete for national titles in college football. I'm going to give the edge to Georgia. They've been doing better recently than Alabama's had in football. So that's why I would have them moving on. But if this were to be a couple years back, then I would have picked Alabama to beat Georgia in this bracket. But for now, Georgia, I think, is better than Alabama in football currently. Then I think Tennessee would beat Iowa State in football. And we'll just stay down here. I think Clemson beats Texas A&M in football. And yeah, I have a feeling Georgia would beat Tennessee in football because, well, Georgia has owned Tennessee in football recently. So that's why I have Georgia moving on there. And then I think Ohio State would beat Louisville, and then Miami would beat Wisconsin. So the Final Four of March Madness 2026, if it were to be based off of college football, on one side we have Ohio State and Clemson, and Miami against Georgia. Who would win between Ohio State and Clemson? Well, both of these two have played against each other, I think, a couple years back in the college football playoff. I think one year Clemson beat Ohio State, and then the following year Ohio State beat Clemson. I think it was sometime around either 2019 or 2020, something like that, around those years that they've played against each other. But I think Ohio State right now would beat Clemson in football. They're just better than them, in my opinion. And then either Miami or Georgia. I think Georgia would beat Miami in football. Although Miami, this past college football season, has made it to the national title game. But they fell short to Indiana. But I think Georgia would beat them. And then, to win it all in the college football bracket, either Ohio State or Georgia, I think Ohio State would beat Georgia if this bracket were to be based off of college football. Although I think a few years back, Georgia did beat Ohio State in the Peach Bowl, where Ohio State missed the field goal that would have won it for them. But I think overall, Ohio State would beat everyone in this bracket if it were to be based off of college football. Yep, so there you have it. Ohio State wins it all in the March Madness bracket of 2026 if it were to be based off of college football. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to join the Sports Tudation. And I'll see you guys later for more wacky brackets.